Hi, everyone. Welcome again to the Good Sound Club podcast. And I'm your host, Tom, along with.
Sina.
And Parker.
We do have a special guest this week. Some of you may know him from interviews years ago, I guess now. It's been on the Steve Guttenberg YouTube channel. But Parker is a senior engineer at Soundsmith. They manufacture phono cartridges and phono accessories by hand in Peekskill, New York. I believe they also do repair, not just for phono cartridges, but all sorts of hi-fi equipment. So we're super fortunate to have him on the show and get to pick his brain kind of about analog and vinyl and just audio in general. So thank you so much for lending your time to us.
Of course.
Okay, I'd like to talk a bit, Parker, if you don't mind, about your background. How did you get into audio? When did it start for you?
I mean, yeah, that's an interesting thing. When I was young, I inherited a Yamaha receiver and some Polk Monitor 7s, which I thought were really cool. I went to college, I was like, yeah, I got these cool speakers. And from that point on, I was just going to thrift stores and just buying basically anything I saw that was not an AVR. I would fix it and I would listen to it and I wouldn't even sell it. I would just give it to people to be like, hey, audio is fun, try this. I got a couple friends into it and we started learning electronics. I had like zero knowledge while I was in college. I was such an asshole. You know the Dunning-Kruger curve where it's like peak of Mount Stupid, then the Valley of Despair. I was
Right.
literally at a point in college, I was peak of Mount Stupid on audio. And then I get hired at Soundsmith and I was just like, boom, way down into the
You got
earth.
humbled.
Yeah. And I realized the more you learn, the more you know you don't know.
Right.
It keeps going. And it basically between college and when I got hired at Soundsmith was a very short period of time. I've been working at a bike shop prior, and I quit the bike shop job. And the guy who I used to work for went like, "Hey, dude, check this place out." Showed me the YouTube video of the tour of Soundsmith. It's like they're in Peekskill. My buddy uses a Soundsmith cartridge. You like audio? You should check this place out. I went in, got an interview, hired immediately.
Wow.
That's good.
What do you think? You interviewed with Peter directly?
Yeah, I interviewed with Peter while he had an eye infection. It was very scary. Like,
Wow.
What do you think impressed him about you?
I
You have to
think
guess.
he knew I knew nothing.
Okay.
I didn't know that about myself, but he saw that I had incredible learning potential, and he saw the work that I had done up to that point in my life, which was I had done an entire like design and build a Formula race car in college from scratch, did all this 3D modeling, and I did the full electrical system on the car, and I did rudimentary audio repairs, and he definitely saw that I was capable of higher knowledge than I was at that
Okay.
point. So that I think that's what turned him on. And it's also like, how often does an engineer walk into your place, you know?
Right.
That never happens.
So what did you go to school for?
I went to school for mechanical engineering at the University of Hartford.
Okay.
University of Oxford?
Hartford in Connecticut. Yeah, it was. I called it Fartford. It was a real mess.
Not a good school?
I was just not happy there. It was a total. For me, honestly, it was a terrible environment. That type of learning environment. The professors were not high quality professors. They were just schmozos, and they had no passion for what they were teaching. The one thing I do attribute to learning in school. This is how you know it was that bad. I only learned one thing.
Okay.
And it was metallurgy, like the cubic structures of steel and heat treating and how to learn heat treating and phase diagrams of steel. I was super interested in this class.
Okay, but you had no clue you wanted to go into audio while you were in school. It was just a hobby for you.
Yeah, I mean, it's still a hobby.
Okay.
It's still a hobby. I enjoy it immensely, and I enjoy being challenged. And the thing about audio is like it's all for fun. Seriously, I'm not like creating rockets or finding a cure for some disease or making prosthetics. I'm making stuff that people enjoy. And I
Right.
think that's, if you don't take it seriously and you just understand you're just working on toys all day, you end up working on toys all day. It's really a fun place to be.
Well, that's the sad part, I think, and what part of the reason why we're doing this show is because people forget how to have fun with the hobby, and they're all serious all the time, and they think it's all about these pretenses, as I like to put it. So glad that we can maybe make an educational show and kind of introduce the fun back into it.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, you can't take any of it seriously. I mean, a lot of people do, and that's their major downfall. Is the moment they start to really get into it and it becomes their life. It's like
Identity.
it becomes their identity. You've lost everything. It's no
Yeah.
longer fun at that point, and you're just in a spiral.
Yeah, I have this equipment, and I've listened to this, and I sold this for this much, and
I drive this car, and I wear this watch. It
yeah.
becomes about your objects and not about the
Yeah.
music. It's interesting because the one thing to maintain joy
Yeah.
in the audio industry is this is distilled wisdom from the elders. Because I get a lot of time to speak with these guys, working with one every day of my life. The distilled wisdom in this is that you should avoid the audio files.
Yeah.
Avoid audio files, and you will have a happy existence, and you eventually you'll come by a true music lover, and then you really get to enjoy the conversation.
Wow, I love that.
How do you define one of these people out in the wild? What are the telltale signs?
The telltale signs are that they talk about, I don't really know. It's kind of like a case to case basis. It's like, are they a chill dude, or are they just all about the equipment? Are they listening to music, or are they listening to their gear? Because a lot of audiophiles use people's music to listen to their system.
Yeah.
I don't need to do that.
On the subject of education, so you're mostly self-taught, I guess, in electronics, at least in the beginning, right? Because you went to school for mech engineering, not
Yeah.
EE.
I went to school for mechanical engineering and not electronics, and now I'm doing electronics every day of my life.
So what advice do you have for someone, especially someone young, someone who's like our age, 25, 24, 21, whatever it may be, to get into electronics? Because I really do think it's so important to at least have like bare minimum repair skills, like know how to work a soldering iron, know how to use a multimeter, know how to read a schematic. I mean, that by itself is going to potentially save you hundreds, thousands of dollars throughout your life, not just with audio, but all appliances. Everything we use these days is electronic, and if you can repair it, you should be able to. What advice do you have?
Well, you basically said it all right there. It's like, buy a soldering iron, and it's gonna cost a little bit of money, $75, and then buy a kit, learn how to solder, and then you will no longer be afraid of it. That's step one. And step two is just like, learn schematics. You don't learn by watching YouTube videos and reading a textbook. Fuck that. You get nothing. It's just wasting your time. It's completely empty, because without the connection to what you're doing, you just take in information, and it just gets stored in a different place of your brain where you can never access it. You're like, oh, I
Access it,
saw this
yeah.
video, but I have no idea what the guy said about op amps. It's like, no, you gotta, if you want to understand op amps, buy a breadboard and just build an op amp circuit. Go on Google Images and just do it. You're gonna need to buy the tools. That's the main thing. Is like, you got money burning a hole in your pocket, just buy tools, because
Yeah.
you get the skills to use these tools. They'll serve you for the rest of your existence on this earth. You don't necessarily need the tool anymore at that point. You could just, intrinsically you understand how to solder. You can go to some place and fix something with a
Right.
soldering iron.
What tools would you recommend? Like
So
like a soldering iron. What would be a good
Yeah.
soldering iron for you?
You get a TS100 soldering iron. There's a bunch of manufacturers that make the same thing. It's an entry level integrated tip heater, so it's like it's modern. It's not like these old soldering irons that have been using the same crappy ceramic core since the dawn of the the electric iron.
Electronic age. Yeah.
Yeah. So that you get a TS100 iron, you buy like 2 tips for it, a big one and a small one. And then you got to buy flux. And this is a very important aspect of soldering because this is something I was very inept towards until I started working with electronics, was the type of flux. I was working in a hobby shop in my childhood, probably up to like the age of 14. It's like, yeah, 12, 13, 14, maybe 15 years old. I was working in a hobby shop building RC cars and doing nitro gas engine stuff, and it was a ton of fun. And I learned how to solder there. And the first thing that someone told me, the most brilliant thing this stupid guy told me, was you need solder to melt solder. So that was step one. It's like you can't just put the iron on a joint and just expect it to melt. You need to create a surface area for it to melt. You need solder to melt solder, and then you got to use flux. So from that point, I was like, any flux will work. No, absolutely, hell no. You can use flux on your project that you will come back in 2 weeks and your project will literally be destroyed by acid. It'll be like you dipped it in a pool of acid. So you got to be very careful what flux you want to buy if you want your thing to be archived or like last more than 2 years. You got to buy flux that says no clean, and it's going to be like $12 a tube. But how often is the regular schmo going to be going through a tube? It's going to last your entire life. $12. So you buy no clean flux. You don't go buy rosin, and you don't buy any sort of plumbing stuff. Although rosin is pretty inert, but you have to cook it. You have to cook out the volatiles. If you let rosin flux just sit on a bare copper, it will turn it green because it is an oxygen getter.
Right.
So rosin will work if you're a little more advanced. I personally, at Soundsmith, I use rosin flux, and Peter hates me for it. He'll see, like, you got to use no clean. It's like, dude, I was the one who brought no clean to Soundsmith. Come on.
That's fun.
What about the subject, the kits? What are some kits that come to mind, audio related or not, actually, that people can use to first time learn how to solder, have fun with it?
Yeah, well, you can build a keyboard. That's always fun. That's very monotonous. I say that like it's a bad thing, but it's
repetitive.
Yeah,
there's opportunity for practice.
It's repetitive, and you get to do the same procedure like 100 times or more. In a lot of cases, a lot more than that. So building a keyboard is good. But the problem with all these keyboard tutorials is they don't use flux, which is infuriating. They're like, oh, I thought the solder has flux inside. Yeah, it does, but it burns out in 2 seconds. And if you have longer dwell time than 2 seconds, then your joint is going to be completely dry. It's going to be oxidized, and it won't be strong, and it'll dry out and become intermittent. You'll have a hell of a time troubleshooting that.
What about audio kits? Let's give one for the headphone guys, one for the 2-channel guys.
Well, I say, I don't know. Audio kits are a challenge because I guess Bottlehead Audio, just buy a Bottlehead kit. Because what's cool about Bottlehead is that the circuits are just standard. They're extremely easy to repair, and Doc himself does every faceplate with a router. I mean, with a hand grinder. He'll sit there and he'll figure every faceplate by hand. It's like you now owned some guy's artwork on top of your amp. And that's something that does sort of turn me off about a lot of Bottlehead builders, is they'll like polish his stuff right off or they'll paint over it. No, what
the unique mark.
The mark of the maker. But you make it your own. So he even posted on his own Instagram. He's like, I love seeing what people do to these kits. And it's crazy to see the lengths they go to in customization, like with the visuals and when they paint their chassis. So he doesn't mind. Yeah, do the wood. So I'd say, oh, dude, it's endless. So it's endless. The Bottlehead crack is like the best way to start with kits because you don't need to know electronics. It's like a soldering project. You don't need to know how to interpret a schematic. You just like, oh, this goes here, that there. the challenge is doing it nicely. It's like the build guide tells you how to do the way they built amps in the 1950s, just by like bending shit and routing it here, wrong lengths, but with a inkling of mechanical ability and just the ability to work with your hands, you can improve upon the manual and just make something nice. There's this guy on Etsy who makes like freaking space grade bottlehead cracks, and it's just mind blowing that you can buy something from this dude and it looks like the photos. The thing is just unbelievably perfect. It's like, that is a craftsman. Those look better than mine. I was like 19 when I did it. I still share pictures because it's nice, but if I did it again, I would do it better.
So that's the thing. You were 19 when you built that, and how old are you now?
24.
24. So 5 years you've had this kit that you made with your own hands, and it still works.
You turn it on and it works. That's what I love about it. And that's because it's not using anything that's like a ticking time bomb. It's just built with all new parts, and that brings me to another point. It's like reliability in designs is something that I am a major proponent for, because personally, since I fix stuff all the time, I really hate fixing my own stuff. I hate working on my own stuff. It just drains me. And I just want something that you hit the power switch, it turns on, and it works. Like, that's step one. The thing just works the way it should. And durability and kit format is like the definition of what a bobblehead is. Although I had a strange issue with mine, which was with the speedball board between the legs of the regulators, the PCB tunneled and it blew up the regulator.
Shorted.
Yeah, the PCB had something weird going on, and it connected and burned itself up and blew up my speedball the first time I turned it on. And I looked at it, it's like, that seriously just happened? So I went on the schematic. It's got all the part numbers. You just order them all on Mauser. I did a couple upgrades, and then it repopulated the board, but this time I took my Dremel and I ground the PCB in between all the high voltage traces. And it's amazing there was no documentation on this. It had to have happened with a certain run of PCBs.
Right.
So for a speaker amp, you can do the amp camp amp on DIY audio. You don't want to. I have a problem with a lot of kits because they'll sell you like a board. They're like, yeah, you drill the chassis, you put your own transistors. It's like, dude, I just want to buy a kit. I don't have time to do this shit.
Yeah, it turns people off for sure.
So there's a couple manufacturers that make a speaker amp. There's Akatika, which I learned the correct pronunciation recently.
I love that one. Yeah,
that's a really cool amp. The performance is just insane for the price. It is cap coupled, but so is the amp camp amp. It's not so bad. So the ACA is a great little design. It's a Zen amp. Look up how much the Nelson Pass Zen was selling for when it was new, and then you look at the price of the amp camp, and it's like, damn. The amp camp has a chassis by, I think it's Maru Shop. I don't know. It's Italy. And it's just like really, really nicely machined chassis. I don't think anything's milled. I think it's all extruded. And then the Akatika is steel. What other kits are good?
On the subject,
I don't know. Do you guys have any ideas for a kit for starters? Since I didn't come up with all of them.
I was going to say I already forgot how to pronounce it. Akitita. What is it?
The GT,
Akatika.
Yeah. The GT102 or something.
Yeah, the GT102. It's a chip amp. It uses a LM integrated chip. Does about 50 watts per channel into 8 ohms. Very affordable. I think the kit price is something like $370 US. And it really, I've looked at the manual. Anyone can build it, and it sounds pretty damn good for $400, including the shipping costs. Like, you'd be very hard pressed to find something that sounds like that.
Yeah, so like, to think about the price that amp would cost if you weren't building it, it would be like 10 times the amount. Probably not, because the profit margins are not that crazy and high.
Well, the guy does sell them assembled. and he charges a very reasonable rate for labor. But if you want the amp, just build it yourself, honestly. But to your point, there is a whole market of boutique chip amps using the same or similar Texas Instruments chip, and
It's
Jesus,
LM386, I believe.
yeah, some of them cost like 2,000 euros. I've seen for for well, depending on who you ask, an inferior design. But yeah, I don't know, Tom. What were you gonna say?
I would go with the Seymour, just a little Seymour, and
I would pull mine out of my desk if I wasn't using it right now.
yeah, so it seems pretty versatile. I mean, I like the little case it comes in, and I don't know what mods I would do to it, but I'm sure there's plenty. I'm sure there's so many
You mean
mods
the
to do to
Seymour by JDS Labs?
like the little Altoid ones, the ones people used to use on
Yeah,
Headphone in
JDS Labs makes
2013.
that kit. I believe they make the full kit. I don't know who else makes a Seymour kit other than JDS. They also make the Objective 2 amp, but that thing kind of sounds bad.
That thing sucks.
I'm
Different
using a
design.
Seymour right now.
For 2-channel, I don't think I have one. I don't think I have a kit. I was thinking of one, but it's kind of too expensive. I guess I'll just say it. Some of those audio node license designs. I don't know what they're called. Sina, do you know
Also,
what
the
those?
coolest shit
Audio
ever,
kit.
but they're like $4,000.
Yeah, at that point, it's no longer a kit.
Yeah, I don't really think
project.
it's a kit. I know a popular kit is those Ellie kits, but I don't think that's a good first kit.
It's not a good first kit, but don't they make like a budget? Oh, that's what it is. Their entry level Ellicit headphone amp is just junk. That's what it is. It's like a snap together box. It's just it's Legos. It's not a DIY
Yeah.
kit.
Yeah, I definitely would.
They make a preamp. They make a preamp that's affordable.
I think that's the
8,500. Yeah,
8500. Okay. Yeah,
Yeah,
I think one of our friends has one of
a
those. He
couple of
loves
friends
it.
of ours have one. Yeah.
yeah, that thing's really cool. The thing about Ellicott design is the way they use so many circuit boards. I'm just astonished by them using circuit boards for things that don't need circuit boards. Like you could use wires in a lot of cases. I saw one using this snap board connector. It was like a PCB, like 7 inches long, and all it had was just a few traces going across, and it would snap on. It's like, dude, use a
Why?
wire. Why?
Oh, I think I've seen that. They have that
Yeah.
for the output stage from the speaker tabs, I think.
It's just so weird. They're using multiple boards. You count the number of boards in some of these amps, and it's like over 10. It's insane.
Yeah,
It's called Fuego design. My friend coined that term for stuff that's absolutely crazy.
Then you don't have to include wires, and I guess I'm sure they did the math on it, but
It's like Legos.
yeah,
It's because Lego.
Now, on the subject of reliability, I know that you work the repair desk at Soundsmith and have seen some shit. So to speak.
To put it lightly, I've seen some.
Can you give us a couple? Can you give us a couple horror stories of equipment?
you don't have to say
And
the
if you don't-
names even too.
Yeah, if you don't want to say the name, you don't have to.
I mean,
I
I know
will
the
say the names.
so-
I will say the names.
Damn.
I saw. Oh my god. Yeah, I mean, not even from Soundsmith. Just talking about repair in general. It's like a lot of companies completely neglect this aspect of their design. And not only do they make stuff that's not repairable, it's like when you ask them for help, they're just
Mhm.
like, fuck you, go away. And it's just a terrible, terrible business practice because I think just me being the way I am, that's something I focus on very heavily because I don't have anyone I can bring my equipment to be repaired. It's like who am I going to bring it to? Me.
Right.
Same with like everything in my life. I've eliminated the repair guy. I've become the repair guy. And I guess anyone can do this. There's no one who's going to do better work than yourself. That's what they say.
especially if you care
So-
about what it is.
Exactly. It's like the guy you bring it to doesn't give a shit. Sometimes he does. Like when I work on something, I pretend like it's mine, and then I'll listen to it and I'll have fun. I'll be like, "Hey, I got a Griffin Coliseum for a week." It's a cool experience, and that's part of what I take pride in is the quality of work that I output. I just treat everything like it's mine. So starting off with repairability, there's companies that I've run into personally outside of Soundsmith that have just screwed me over completely, and it's really disheartening to see the industry shift in this kind of way where you basically own something for the life of the warranty period. As soon as the warranty expires, the thing's like floating into the abyss. And I hate that. Like, what if I like my Lynn CD player? What if I want to fix it? I love
Yeah.
that thing. And you email Lynn and they're like, bring it to an authorized Lynn service technician. It's like, do you guys even have boards for this? No, we don't. Boards are no longer produced. Dude, what is that guy gonna do to it that I'm not gonna do? Just give me the fucking schematic. Come on.
Yeah.
And that's something that no one really appreciates anymore. I mean, there's guys who are like way for right to repair, but it's completely being lost in basically any industry, audio included. It's majorly lost in audio. A lot of manufacturers that I deal with are just with modern equipment are completely radio silent when you ask them for information on their own products. It's like they don't want to have anything to do with their own stuff. And it's crazy. And there are companies that will help you. One thing I had help with, this is probably the longest repair I've ever done in my life, was the Meridian CD207. That thing took me 8 weeks to fix. 8 weeks of my life. 8 hours a day.
Yeah, that's the flagship Meridian CD player from the 90s or whatever.
Yeah, it was such a cool machine. It was a CD player, CD transport, DAC for its own transport,
Right.
and a fully functional preamp with an analog volume control and a Phonostage. Some of them had a phono option where you plug in phono card, and
Wow.
this thing was like garage made early digital electronics, and it was totally overkill. And just the sheer amount of quality to this design. So Meridian used to make some nice stuff. Doesn't mean that it doesn't fail. What happened in this was like some crazy chips that they had programmed using selective etching processes, which is essentially creates a chip that you cannot read the data off.
Yeah.
These chips failed. And to replace it, I had to cannibalize broken CD207s. And I eventually got a stack of them working. Like not only just the one for the customer and one for Sounds, but just a couple of our broken units I was able to fix as well with all the information I learned. Meridian was helpful in that they supplied me with a service manual that was like 700 pages.
Wow.
Now, think about this, right? It's a service manual. What's in a service manual? Schematic, alignment instructions, board view, BOM. Why is it 700 pages? It's because it's British. They went nuts on it. And so I had made cliff notes of this novel of a manual. And
you made the
I printed
American
out
version.
the American version. And I printed it out, and it was this thick, and I actually bound it together like a book. And this was the funniest thing ever. When I was done with the repair, I put it in like a time capsule with the broken 207 units, and then I buried it in the annals of Soundsmith manual. But that was interesting. It's like, yeah, they gave me the manual. They didn't help me after that. And the manual was 700 pages long. And it didn't help me very much because it didn't cover the faults I was experiencing. But that was an intense repair. I ended up with like almost 1,000 capacitors that I had replaced, just tubs of blue Rubicon capacitors. I laid them out. At one point, it was like 8 feet doubled up of these capacitors. That was one horror story. Let me think of another.
All right. Does it ever surprise you how much your customers are willing to pay to repair certain pieces of gear? Like, are you ever just like, dude, this isn't worth it, and then they want to do it anyway?
No, because I feel the same way about a lot. It's like if I was in their position, I'd pay $1,000 to get the thing that I really love fixed. And if it costs more than that, I'd be like, all right, I'm buying another. I'm going to send it to you. Change the capacitors. I find ways to rationalize it because in a way what they're doing is they're fixing something instead of throwing it away and buying something new, which is something you should always do. You get this old high performance piece of equipment. It's like it's just as good as what they're making now, if not better in a lot of regards. Philips CDM2 lasers being the best CD laser ever made. The players associated with these, a lot of them died due to aging electrolytic capacitors. It's like, yeah, you can throw it away, but you just threw away the best CD laser ever made. What are you going to do now?
Yeah, some of the best optical pickup units ever made.
Yeah, the CDM2 is a hermetically sealed laser. They've never done anything like that since. So, like, I understand getting attached to stuff, and the labor rate is high. It's like that's more than I would pay. That's why I fix it myself. Yeah, 110 an hour for a bench rate. A lot of repairs we can fix within an hour. So that's worth it. But when it takes 8 weeks, how are you going to charge someone 110 an hour for 8 weeks? It's like I charged that dude $1,500 to fix his CD player. And it's like that is
Meridian?
a shitload for the Meridian. That was 8 weeks of work for $1,500. And
study the manual.
Yeah. I know that thing inside and out. When I look at it's like an X-ray. I see directly through it.
Now, maybe you can give a bit of a PSA here. There are a lot of people who buy vintage equipment, whether it be receivers or CD players or turntables, and they don't actually realize like just how in need of restoration this equipment is before they listen to it and think that they're getting, I don't know, people online rave about or whatever. Do you have an experience you can point to and be like, yeah, this thing sounded like crap until we restored it, basically?
Well, that's pretty much every restoration.
Yeah.
It's going to significantly improve to what the original intentions were of the manufacturer or surpass them because of the ways we can now troubleshoot better and engineer better solutions to problems that they encounter. There's not a single restoration that I've done where the product didn't come out significantly better than when it entered the shop. And there's people online who will be like, I fired this thing up. I have a specific taste for vintage amplifiers that have been unrestored and unmolested. And I fire them up so they get a brief amount of life and then they die. And then I'll buy another one. It's like, dude, do you realize what you're doing? You're just destroying all this classic and incredible gear just so you can hear it in a very fucked up state. Like, there's no connection. There were parts back then that are better than they're being made now. For instance, like, look at a polystyrene capacitor. Think of a more ideal electrical component that approaches the electrical model of a styrene is it. No one's making styrenes anymore. You're just buying old stuff. And a lot of vintage equipment, like just normal stuff, had styrenes in there. It's like this is really cool. And in that regard, in a restoration like that, you either, if the styrenes are broken, you find new styrenes. You don't go replacing it with a modern capacitor. You find new old stock styrenes for that circuit. A lot of times when they used that type of component, like a tantalum capacitor or a styrene or germanium, it was part of what made the device work. So you need to literally hit the nail with those operating parameters. Otherwise, the restoration, it's just not going to work. You're going to create a monster because then you're going to finish this amp. It's going to oscillate because the filter circuit doesn't work properly. And then you're going to slow down the amp so it doesn't oscillate. And now you've just destroyed it. So there's a finesse in restorations where you identify the failure points and you fix those, and then you go through the entire thing. what is going to break? This is going to break. And then you change it. And once it's done, it's just a new and incredible piece. Because a lot of the engineering that was done back then was designed around like components that wouldn't be implemented today. It's kind of like cost no object. You see giant components. No one does through hole anymore. And that's like a lot of the serviceability aspect. That's the reason why we can fix this stuff. They used components and they were assembled by hand.
Now, outside of specific cases like the polystyrene capacitors, how do you go about choosing the components that you use when you recap an amp, especially amplifiers or any component, I guess, of different vintages, right? They had different styles of caps they were using, and that's where I think part of where this big debate for originality comes from, is to not change the signature of the amp, right? So I'm just wondering if you have certain brands that you trust, if it's ever the customer's request of what you use, or how do you make that decision?
Yeah, well, it's going to sound a little pretentious, but if the customer's request is reasonable, I'll do it. So it's like if they want to use this type of capacitor, I'll be like, yeah, sure, we'll try it. And that's if it's going to work. A lot of the times they're like, I want you to recable my amp with transparent audio wire. It's like, you got to pay for that? Okay. Whatever. And the way you choose components is basically you develop a knowledge base of parts that are good in doing service and repairs. So for electrolytic capacitors, I'll pretty much exclusively use Panasonic FG or Nichicon capacitors because of their durability and their performance. It's like I don't want to sound crazy, but their electrolytic capacitors are good enough to pass audio signals through at this point. They've advanced so much since just even the 90s that the Panasonic FG can actually be used as a coupling capacitor. But I still wouldn't do that because I have my own ideas. But that's whenever I replace an electrolytic, it's usually Panasonic FG or Nichicon Gold if you want the thing to be shiny and gold on the inside. For stuff that's complicated like bumblebee capacitors, paper and oil, you got to identify like, where was this used in the circuit? What is it being used for? Can it be omitted entirely? Or can it be substituted for something with a less linear dielectric and highly increased durability? Would that improve the performance of this unit? Or are you going to use a film cap in its place and it wouldn't change it at all? Or you can buy a brand new Jupiter paper and oil and do $12 a capacitor for an entire restoration, costing thousands of dollars in parts. So it's case dependent on what parts you use, but you don't want to use anything that's unreliable. You basically, reliability in a restoration is, in my perspective, is the number one. And then you want to make it so that you turn it on and it works. You don't want the thing to blow up. And then you can optimize each stage according to what the original manufacturer intended, or make it better. In a lot of cases, you can make it better.
Okay, good answer. What do you like for film caps? I'm just curious. If I gave you like a $500 tube amp and just wasn't worth that much money, had paper or wax caps in there, they're all bad, you have to replace the couplers, what would you use?
Well, it's funny because there's a lot of audiophile caps that are crap.
Yep.
So I'm not going to name any manufacturer. I'll slip, but I measured some that are so bad that it's just like, how do you do this? And then you take Illinois capacitor, which is notorious for making the worst electrolytics known to man, something that will fail within 2 months. They're axial electrolytics. You turn your amp on, and they will ooze out of the ends. You'll see them boil. Oh, cool.
That'd be good for
Smells
business.
like dead fish. It's bad for business. And then their film caps, since it's a newer production process or something, it measures and it just works so much better than like 80% of audiophile capacitors. What the fuck is going on? Because their film caps are exceptional. Although, due to their reputation, I would never use them in a repair. So, as far as film caps, a good brand, there's Oricap, which uses really cool leads that are sleeved and into the resin. I love that. It just looks so good. And then there's
Sorry, what was the brand? You cut out for a second.
Auricap, AURICAP. They're yellow and they have a inside and outside foil indicator on the leads. And that's another important thing with film caps is you want to identify inside outside foils. If you're trying to really optimize a circuit, you want the outside foil orientation proper so that you get better noise rejection. And it's really convenient when the manufacturers label their capacitors. Otherwise, you got to figure it out by literally holding it to an oscilloscope and putting it up to a light bulb. That's how you do it.
Wow.
And then, or you can inject noise with a tape head demagnetizer. Another one was, I think it was called Clarity Cap. Now, those were probably the best coupling capacitors I've ever heard in my life. We put those in an amp, and I was just like, holy crap. How is this a cap coupled amplifier if it sounds this good? A lot of cases you can get away with WEMAs if you're not passing the signal. WEMAs are fantastic because it's a high performance film cap with great energy density. So like a WEMA 100 microfarad is small, but a Solon 100 microfarad is like the size of my fist.
Yeah.
It's very cool that they can do that. As far as what I've experienced, just Auricap is probably my favorite because of the leads. It's just they're so cool.
Any paper and oil caps that you could recommend?
Jupiter, they're like the only ones making a reliable PIO. And I use those in a lot of guitar amp restoration because they're so fucking cool. They emulate the labels from the original paper and oil capacitors. So you can do the whole amp. The original 1950s Fender Tweed, you recap the entire thing, all the PIOs, and it just looks original, and it's like, this thing actually works now. It's sick.
Yeah. That's huge in the guitar amp market. I know as guys want the original look. Even if it's not the real thing.
They want the original parts. It's like, that is dangerous. You realize the way this amp, a lot of times I'll get an amp in and configured. You can get shocked by the strings on your guitar.
Yeah.
Or you get electrocuted by the chassis because they have the death cap and it's just totally not a cap anymore and it can actually kill you.
No longer blocks DC.
No, it has become a wire.
All right, Parker. I wanted to ask you about cartridges, vinyl playback, and, what are some things to be aware of?
Well, yeah, Soundsmith, what it is all of our cartridges are moving iron, except for the strain gauge, which has no magnets. But the reason we pursue moving iron technology is because it allows you to separate the components of a phono cartridge and create a generator with far lower moving mass than conventional methods, because the magnetic flux is being provided by an external magnet, so thereby it's lighter than a moving magnet, and there's no coils of wire around the armature, so it's basically as light as a moving coil with no wires. So that's the whole design principle behind a Soundsmith, is ultra low moving mass. And there's multiple caveats to the type of generator that are very conducive to high performance. Like it's not unusual for a Soundsmith cartridge to have abnormally high channel separation, like in excess of 50 dB, where conventional designs are around 25 dB of separation. That's just because the way the generator works. Just any magnetic cartridge, you build it right, and it's going to do 50 dB channel separation, which is really cool to see when that happens. And on our website, the whole thing is like, the philosophy of our products is under promise, over deliver. But you look at the specs on our website, and then you actually want to analyze one of our cartridges, they'll typically do like double what the spec is rated. It's very cool. And I'm very proud to be working at a place that does something like that. It's honest business.
When you talk about moving iron versus moving coil versus moving magnet, these terms are all referring to the generator system, right? Is that fair to say?
Yeah, in the cartridge, it's what produces the voltage in a magnetic design. There's a bunch of different methods, and there's a lot of different ways to skin a cat. So there's like, from what I've seen, I could right now probably draw up 25 different ways to generate a voltage from a phono cartridge.
Now I know you guys are kind of
stylus.
famous for doing the moving iron, and so is Grotto, also coincidentally in New York. Are there any other manufacturers that you know that are employing that right now in their products? Right?
Other manufacturers that are making a moving iron, I believe in Japan there's someone making a moving iron, but I just can't remember the name. Our design is based on a Bang & Olufsen cartridge, which they
Mhm.
were all moving iron, and they must have been designed by an alien because this guy's understanding of magnetics is is crazy. It's something you would never think of. Is like combining the shield of the cartridge with the magnetic circuit, and it just when you take a Soundsmith design and you break it down into the basic magnetic circuits, like how did this dude come up with this? And it was Peter who took it upon himself to re-engineer the B&O cartridges because they threw out they disposed of all their tooling when they shifted to CDs, and everything was gone. And Peter basically started from the ground up and got the rights to manufacture B&O, and he did it. It took him 2 years and like crazy hours, and the dude actually figured it out from the ground up. Thankfully he did that because that started his company. And then along with that, he evolved the B&O cartridge design, making it more reliable and easier to manufacture and more repeatable as well. Because what they were doing at B&O, it was extremely challenging to recreate exactly the way they had it done because of
Mhm.
all their proprietary tooling. And if you're one guy,
Now, Peter, that's the
almost
founder
impossible.
of Soundsmith for the listeners who don't know. So, Soundsmith got their start by offering B&O replacement cartridges because their turntables and tone arms, I guess, have a proprietary mounting system, right, for their carts. You
Yeah,
can't just put anything on there.
Soundsmith started as like an electronics repair and cartridge manufacturer. Bang & Olufsen turntables are proprietary. The cartridges are very small, and but when you take it apart, the internals are about the same size as a regular generator system, which is fascinating because you just realize the efficient use of space B&O designed for their cartridges. Their turntables were something else. It was really amazing the engineering put into some of these things.
And this was in the 80s, late 70s, when B&O was doing these designs?
Yeah, they started it 70s, 80s, and then killed it in the 90s.
Right,
It
with
may have
the
gone earlier. Like there's some old B&O decks. I don't know when the first cartridge was made by B&O. It could go back to the 60s. And there's some idler drive B&O turntables which are very fascinating.
Now, another term for moving iron, I guess, is fixed coil, right?
Yeah.
So fixed coil kind of predates all the way to the gramophone era, right? Where you had these giant horseshoe magnets with an armature in between that was holding the replaceable steel needle. Um, I don't know
Yeah,
how
early
familiar you are.
electronic systems were similar in the way they worked.
Yeah, I don't know how familiar you are with phono history. I guess with the advent of the LP in the late 40s, do you have any understanding of why the industry at large moved away from fixed coil as a design?
Well, yeah, I'm not too well adversed in phono history, but that is something I do know. And the reason is because the original moving coil, when it came out, it was much better than what they could do with moving magnets. And it was significantly lower moving mass. And so that was like the first step towards a lightweight generator system, was designing something with low moving mass. And it just happened to be that with the technology at the time, moving coils were how you would go about doing that. So it caught on. It was a cartridge that could reproduce up to 20 kilohertz easily, and
Right,
it just had very desirable properties compared to what people were using earlier.
right. And that was credited to Ortofon, or who did it? The moving coils, the first moving coils.
I don't really know. I think it was either Ortofon or Grado. I know was making moving coils around that time in his kitchen on his kitchen table. He may, yeah, I'm not sure. It's one of those guys that created the first one.
So there's nothing really inherently wrong with fixed coil. It's just that in the quest for lower moving mass, the engineers shifted to another design. But in the 80s or 70s, as you said, B&O managed to do it with moving iron.
Yeah, as materials advance, you can take advantage of what they're capable of, and there's certain types of magnetic iron compounds and magnetic iron alloys that were not even conceived in the early 40s, 50s.
Right.
I have a question about like material choice in cartridges. What delivers performance? Like, let's start from the stylus.
Yeah, so essentially, you can back up a little bit. It's like you talking about performance, right?
Mm-hmm.
You ask any sort of engineer that's optimizing a system for performance, say like a race car, Pikes Peak. You want to set the record at Pikes Peak. You ask what the guys are trying to accomplish. They say you got to make it light. So that's primarily if you're making something with a generator and you're making something that moves and it has to reproduce a waveform, you basically want to emulate the natural world and have as little moving mass as possible so that that's capable. And starting from the stylus, there are different styli types that have different moving mass. Like you go on Namiki's website, they will literally sell you the cantilever and stylus, and you can tell basically which ones are going to be heavier. Like the aluminum's obviously going to be heavier than a narrow boron rod. And on lower end cartridges, they use bonded styli, which is a diamond tip bonded to a steel shank, which is swaged into a cantilever. It's typically, sometimes they're even plastic cantilevers or aluminum cantilevers. So you want to eliminate moving mass at every step of the process. The diamond stylus, it starts by getting a nude diamond, so it's not bonded. And then you can look on Namiki's website. You see the different sizes of diamond. You want to really get something tiny that's just big enough for LP playback and that's got the right geometry. And you don't want to have a large glue joint at the tip because that's where the mass is not being multiplied, or that's where the leverage is not being multiplied. If you have mass at the generator, like a moving coil, the cantilever acts as a force multiplier. So it doesn't matter as much. But if you have mass right at the stylus, that's like, no, that's terrible. That's like having heavy wheels on your race car. That's a terrible thing. So you get a low mass stylus, you get a good mechanical coupling to the cantilever with using it. You can see again on Namiki's website, they use all sorts of epoxy compounds and different types of glue to just really minimally attach the stylus to the cantilever while making it strong. Because if you cue down and the stylus rips off, then you're screwed. So then you move on to cantilever materials. Like I said before, there's aluminum. Some people are making titanium, tapered systems. I've seen tapered steel. I've seen tapered aluminum, titanium. I think Audio Note is doing a titanium cantilever cartridge with a tapered cantilever. Those are very cool. And then you got the gemstones and then boron. A big proponent of boron is Lyra. They talk about the speed of sound in boron being really fast and efficient. And then you have organic cantilevers, which is something that we like to do at Soundsmith, is use the cactus spine. And the reason we do that is primarily because of the filtering properties, but it's also extremely low mass. Like you think of the weight of a organic fiber versus a stone. It's like
Right.
it's very evident. You can weigh all these things on a scale. It's not like they're impossible to measure. Who else makes a organic cantilever? Miyajima. They do
Yeah.
yeah.
The site you keep mentioning, Namiki, I guess they're a Japanese OEM supplier of cantilevers and styluses, right?
Yeah, they are the guys who make there's a couple manufacturers, but Namiki is cool in the fact that they will literally just sell you a part off their website. You can go
Right.
just see what everything looks like. They give you the geometry. Like, you can't make this, so we'll sell it to you. And they're very fascinating, and they make some really incredible geometries. Like, you can buy a micro ridge stylus on a boron cantilever. It's expensive. It's like $450, but if you put that on your own cartridge. You can do it at home. There's nothing stopping you from doing that at home. That would be like a really easy way to get a high performance cartridge.
If you have steady hands. Yeah. Now, do you think you mentioned $450 for that assembly? Do you think that cost is justified in the sense of how difficult it is to actually produce, or is it more just a supply demand thing? Like, not
It's
many firms in the
both.
world.
Yeah, it's like where are you gonna buy something like that? You know, you can try and make it yourself out of an industrial diamond, but the geometry is extremely challenging. Just thinking about the tooling involved, you're like, yeah, I'll pay $450 for that.
Yeah.
Forget the tooling, because you need to be able to lap the diamond. You need to do it at that scale. What you're doing is you're timing it. You're not looking at it. So you flip it, and you need a fixture to hold the diamond and facet it and get the right geometry. And then you need to get a piece of boron, which is crazy. These things are grown, they're cultured. So, another cool thing about B&O was they used a hollow sapphire cantilever. And if you broke it, if you broke it and you looked inside, it looked like a crystal cave. All the crystals were forming from the outside in. So the way they did that was probably by using a sacrificial mold, where they would culture the crystal and then dissolve away the mold and leave the hollow cantilever for lower moving mass. Material properties wise, it's highly desirable at that scale. Its wear is not very good. So you see like early phono cartridges and cheap stuff, they'll actually use sapphire styli instead of a diamond.
Right.
But sapphire is a better material for cantilevers, just because of its stiffness, and you can create it with uniform crystal structure. It's very predictable, and it's just a great material to work with at that scale. Clearly, it's not the best though. There's things that are better.
Let's move up to the magnetic system. What about the core material for the magnetic core? I know that there are some companies doing samarium cobalt, some doing neodymium, some doing alnico, like the guitar guys. Like, what are your thoughts on that? What do you guys use at Soundsmith?
Well, at Soundsmith, we use a neodymium magnet, and the magnetic circuit basically for every different cartridge varies. It's not as plain and simple as like using a magnet in a speaker or in a motor. It's at a very small scale, and you're working with very precise fields because it's so tiny. So the magnet choice is basically dependent on the design of the phono cartridge, and what you can use depends on your space constraints and the flux density saturation requirements, and basically where the magnetic flux is being directed will dictate what type of magnet you need to use. So at Soundsmith, we use neodymium because we need to make the magnet very small, and in doing so, to get something with the right amount of strength so that we're into flux saturation, we need to use a very powerful magnet. So that basically relegates to neodymium only.
What about alnico? Is that just kooky to you in this day and age to?
I mean, it depends. Like there are benefits to using other types of magnets like ferrite and alnico, because they're flux modulation. But you think about the amount of current being generated with this magnetic field, it's not realistically enough to put your field into flux modulation in an amount that's considerable to the response of the cartridge. So basically it's more important that you get an efficient magnetic field and you don't design in excess, and you don't have a magnet that's pulling your stuff apart or attracting filings from the atmosphere and your records, because a lot of these companies will put this crazy powerful magnet and like direct the poles right on top of the coils, and it just like picks up junk. And that's really annoying when you have to repair this sort of stuff. It's just completely covered in magnetic filings. Not everyone does this, but there are companies that will just go way overkill with the magnet just because they think it sounds better.
Right.
Faster sounding, maybe.
Perhaps.
Now, after the magnetics, right? What about the casing? I know not everyone shields their cartridges, but I think Soundsmith does.
Yeah, Soundsmith is fully shielded. Like you look at a B&O cartridge, the outside is tied to ground. So that's your full magnetic and electronic circuit is shielded. The cool thing about that is the shields we do in house, and we get to control the metallurgy of these parts. I shared photos earlier about the grain structures of steel and the furnace I was using, and you really get to control. Here, I have one right here. This is not in focus, but this
It's
is a
okay.
shield for a Soundsmith cartridge. Inside the front is where the magnet goes, and then the shield creates a magnetic circuit right on top of the generator.
Some turning vector stuff.
Yeah, it's really crazy. So
Wow.
this completely covers the guts, and the internals of the cartridge all fit inside. So
Right.
this and annealing them and creating large grains increases its performance at low frequencies. So this has incredible noise rejection at 60 hertz. So if you put it on a direct drive table, you're going over the coils. It's going to pick up nothing. Whereas some cartridges, I'm not going to name any names,
It's
Yeah.
okay.
but some will actually pick up the
Some
frequency
hum.
driving the direct drive table. Yeah.
Wow.
So Parker's showing us a tiny metal shell, basically the size of an eraser. And that's kind of the B&O standard, I guess, that Soundsmith adopted their cartridges from. I know that you guys, for the standard mount, the half-inch mount bodies that you do, where did the inspiration come from those designs? Because they look really cool. They look like the front almost like of a steam train on the Hyperion and the bodies like that. Do you know where that inspiration came from for that
Well,
design?
yeah, Peter worked with his friends and just basically drew it up in a night and then
Mm,
designed it to get CNC'd. The Soundsmith Peter went it's an interesting story because he's gone through an iterative process of designing the current phono cartridges because we've gone through like multiple generations. You look at old Soundsmith cartridges and the early ones were just a B&O like this bolted into a plastic housing that would screw onto a normal head shell.
right,
And then it evolved into something with changing VTA, and the thing looked like a wooden shoe. It was I'm not a
right,
big fan of the design. And it slowly evolved into a normal looking phono cartridge. And then when he had the idea to create the ES series and have them machined out of 6000 series aluminum, he just talked to his friends who are very good engineers and 3D modelers, and he drew it on a piece of paper. It's like held it up to the camera on Skype, and they went with it.
Wow.
How much influence do you think comes from the material used for the housing in terms of just whatever sound comes from the resonances?
All right, yeah, this is an interesting topic because the amount of force involved in playing a record is extremely high. It's in
Hmm.
excess of like 30,000 psi at the stylus tip, and you think about the violence of this system and it creating waves 20 kilohertz. This thing's really going crazy, and all that energy has to go somewhere. A lot of it, it's a very complex spectrum of waves that just need to be dissipated and wicked away. And designs with higher moving mass, a thing that you will observe is something called jitter in a phono cartridge, where the energy from the stylus tip goes up the cantilever and it has this giant moving mass, this mass at the end. And so it's not going to be able to accelerate it at the same speed of the sum and difference products of the resonance. So it reflects, it hits the wall and
Right.
it reflects back down. And then it'll cause your stylus to bounce around and not trace properly at high frequency. And you can measure this by tracing out past 20 kilohertz. You'll see even a lot of cartridges with high moving mass, their frequency response is crazy. Like 12, 16 dB treble peaks. It's in
Wow.
the audio band. It's insane. And the material you use in this system plays a lot with how efficiently the energy is being absorbed or directed. So you want to basically match something called mechanical impedance. So you want to understand that there's going to be a positive form of the wave and a negative that goes back in the tone arm. And to make this an efficient circuit, you want to match the mechanical impedance of the materials you're using so that the energy can just go straight through without hitting and reflecting back. So
Right.
the aluminum is cool because it's very efficient at wave transfer. Wood is good in some ways because not only does it transfer, it also converts a lot of the wave to heat. So it's basically it's another way to linearize your system is by optimizing the materials you use in the circuit. You look at Rega turntables. This is a cool thing because they have this full closed loop mentality that is basically the right way to do a turntable. I have a lot of problems with the Rega designs because of the lack of adjustability, but there are good things, and you'll notice on their high end tables. I think starting with the P6 or the P3, one of them has a brace. I mean, from that model
Mhm.
up, they have a brace going from the tone arm to the bearing,
I've seen
and
that.
that's because the positive and negative waveforms will go around and they'll meet at the center of mass, and they'll cancel each other out. So that's how you create a low distortion, efficient mechanical path for the waves to null themselves. This is another reason why decoupling your tone arm from the record player is a horrible idea because
Right.
you break the loop open and
Right.
you just have this one part of the wave and the other part of the wave creating oscillations, and it can cause weird anomalies.
Wow, I never knew any of that. That was that was
It's
absolutely incredible. I had no idea there was so much, insight in
yeah.
cartridge
Who
design
else
and
did that?
turntable design.
There's the Lin. Lin talks about the closed loop, and you look under an LP12, and it's also got braces going across. LP12 is a table I particularly like. There's some things I don't like about it that I think a Thorin's does better, but personally, I like the Lin because it's got wood, not MDF. But the
Yeah.
sub chassis of the Lin it's stamped steel, and then it's got this brace again going from the tone arm to the platter. It'd be better if it was cast aluminum, like a Thorens or a Bang& Olufsen. They had these on their 4000 series turntables. The whole sub chassis was cast aluminum. It was just the most incredible thing. But that's just an idea.
For what you're talking about, the cantilever and the reflecting of the energy, would it be an accurate analogy to say it's like an unbalanced seesaw? There's like a fat kid on one end and a skinny one on the other?
It's more like a broomstick and a brick
Right.
wall. It's just the
Okay.
analogy my boss uses. So it's like this sort of thing.
Right.
Just
You
wondering
energize one
diagram.
end, and this end's got high mass, so it's just gonna spring around. But if this end had low mass, it would stop.
Now I know that moving iron, or I should say, I should continue to say fixed coil, just so we can juxtaposition it with moving coil, offers some advantages with regards to the diameter of the wire used for the coil. You can get away with using thicker diameter wire,
Oh yeah,
right?
because your wire is not moving. So
Right.
this has a number of advantages, not only for electrical parameters, but for mechanical parameters, like a durability perspective as well, because you no
Yeah.
longer have to drape your wires in a flex configuration.
Yeah.
And it allows you to use a thicker gauge, and well, thicker gauge, but you need to use a lot more turns because essentially the generator is not as efficient, so you need more turns of wire to generate the same voltage. So you,
Mm.
in theory, well, in practice, you are capable of creating a moving iron an electrical system with the same electrical properties as a moving coil, like a sub 10 ohm DC resistance and really low inductance. Problem is, your output's going to be pretty dang low. And we've done this before. The thing is, the industry's standardized around the 0.2 millivolt low output MC and then the 2 millivolt so you got to adhere to that. So the SoundSmith
Mm.
low output designs use a very thick gauge of wire to approximate the properties of a commercially available moving coil. Although you can actually push it further. Like if you want to make a phono preamp with 80 dB of gain, you can do like a 0.5 ohm cartridge, which would be very cool. You'd have virtually no inductance, capacitance, resistance, and it just have insane bandwidth.
When you're talking about, what was I going to ask? Okay, when you're talking about moving coil cartridges, the reason why they typically have low output, the majority of them that are on the market, is exactly what you just mentioned, is that they have to have a lower number of turns because the coil is part of the moving system.
Yeah.
If you want high performance, you have to sacrifice the cartridge's output. But isn't it kind of a catch-22 that downstream now you need to either add more active devices or passive devices in the form of a transformer to compensate for that loss?
That's totally right, and that's why we use step-up transformers with a lot of moving coils, is because it provides gain without noise, and to do 60 dB of gain without a transformer, thing's just going to be amplifying a crap load of noise. So in a lot of regards, it's a trade-off, because now your cartridge is more electrically ideal, but your line stage is less ideal because you have an interfacing transformer. So
absolutely,
this is why in a way I prefer high output designs, because the simplicity of the electronics that are associated with it. Does it sound better? It's questionable. You got to realize like where are you getting the most amount of performance gains, by optimizing the electrical parameters of the cartridge or you're associating electronics. I'm pretty sure from my experience it's better to optimize the cartridge and then use a transformer if you're going to want the best performance and the best sound. But it's cool to think about high output doing that.
Yeah, I agree with you about a preference for high output. I think anyone who's dipped their toe into moving coil cartridges has found out how much of a pain in the ass it can be to find a good sounding transformer that fits a reasonable budget. Now that you've just spent a bunch of money on a cartridge, and then also interfaces with whatever phono pre you're using downstream, it's a real challenge. It complicates an already complicated subject.
Yeah, and it's always challenging because transformers are extremely tricky. And to do it right, you basically just got to experiment. Lundall's a good standard. We use step-ups by Lundall at Soundsmith in our demo system, and it sounds very good. I have no complaints at all.
What is your demo system?
Our demo system is a VPI turntable that we use because it has hot swappable tone arms. And then we have a non-swappable Schroeder arm on the back with a strain gauge. And we got our big strain gauge preamp, and then 2 Soundsmith power amps running balanced. And the strain gauge preamp's outputting like 16 volts differential into the monoblocks.
Whoa.
Which are lateral MOSFET. Zero feedback, lateral MOSFET, sliding bias. They're crazy amps.
I gotta hear those.
Tom, did you have any more questions on the subject of cartridge design before I move on?
So, at Soundsmith, do you use different metals for your shells, or do you mostly have them standardized throughout the designs?
Yeah, the magnetic cartridges are all basically using the same base body, and the only difference is some cartridges will use a brass yoke, which changes the effective mass of the cartridge. The low compliance cartridges need to be heavier. So instead of an aluminum yoke, we'll use brass. And then we can also swap out the aluminum for corian, which is lighter than aluminum. If we want to make an ultra light cartridge for a light tone arm, we'll do a corian yoke, and that'll bring the cartridge mass to an acceptable level for low mass arms. So it's a cool system. The shells screw together, and then the yoke glues in, and that dictates the amount of the weight of the cartridge.
And that's pretty consistent across the industry, right? Like any big name manufacturer, Ortofon, Audio Technica, whatever, they have their idea of what a phono cartridge system should look like, more or less. Or they might have multiple lines, but generally they'll have one flagship one. And then just as you go up the line, you're really paying more and more for more advanced materials, slightly more advanced, engineering solutions. But for the most part, the design is the same, and people are willing to pay for that, even though it's not always commiserate with what you're getting.
Yeah. So, like, for instance, the Atello cartridge uses the same base body as our Hyperion, which is a $400 and then an $8,000 cartridge.
Yeah.
But that's not where that makes the Atello a really good bargain. Then,
Right.
because on a side note, you look around and how many people are doing a fully CNC machined aluminum cartridge. That I find to be extremely cool. But the difference between an Atello and a Hyperion, you don't need to be a genius to listen to either one and tell that the Hyperion's significantly better. It's because it uses a more advanced generator, and it's using much more advanced materials. It's way more thought out. And not that the Atello's a slouch. I mean, it performs very well at its price, but I believe that the body sharing in between the two is nothing indicating of their performance. If anything, it should say that the Atello is really good at what it is. I have one here. This is a Carmen.
Yeah.
Focus.
Little green cartridge.
Yeah.
Now it's
Sounds
about
magical.
$1,000, right?
This one's $1,000. Yeah, it's got nothing in it. You could see straight through.
Cool. On the subject of shells, what are your opinion about the huge market, the aftermarket there is for Denon 103 and 103R bodies, basically?
Well,
Do you think those are a worthwhile investment, or are people kind of just barking up the wrong tree?
yeah, totally. The DL103 is a great magnetic system. So the advantage of that is that you can buy the cartridge, change the cantilever with one of these Namiki ones. What you do is you cut it off and you ream it, and you literally slide in the Namiki gemstone and glue it in place. It is that easy to upgrade a Denon. And then you crack it out of the plastic body and you put it in something with good mechanical impedance matching to your tone arm, and you've created a $15,000 Japanese cartridge.
Yeah, basically.
Yeah.
That's a great value.
The one thing that differentiates a flagship cartridge from a DL103 is the pole pieces and the magnet. The DL103 uses this big rare earth magnet. It's like the entire length of the cartridge. It's like 90% of the weight of this cartridge. And then the pole pieces that snap onto it are stamped steel, or they're magnetic steel. So stamping, I'm never a fan of anything being stamped. So the upgrade to that is machining the pole pieces. And then that's it. That's all you would need to do to make it literally a flagship design.
Would you want it to have magnetic pieces that aren't part of the generator system?
Well, yeah, you got to direct the flux from the magnet onto the generator.
Okay.
So what a lot of them do is they have this, say like this is the cantilever. They have the magnet up here and a fork that comes down, and that will direct the flux onto the coils, and then the rear is connected with another piece. It's all about flux.
Controls the flow.
Control the flow.
Let's shift gears a little bit. If you wouldn't mind telling us a bit about your stereo system. What do you use to enjoy music?
I got, if you can see, a mattress on the wall for sound deadening, and then my JBL 590 with a hat.
JBL Studio 590s with a hat?
With a sonic hat. And then I've got my shit audio turntable, which I roll. Yeah, the Soul. Which is I have my own thesis about that thing. And then
but it sounds
good. Yeah,
good.
you can make it sound good. And then there's the synthesizer. It's weird because it's mirrored. There's my synthesizer, which I play every night. And then I have can't really see. Hold on. A Stax Lambda headphone system back there, and a Tandberg amp. There's the little Grado Seymour. Then there's the Soundsmith Electronics for the accompanying strain gauge.
Is the original Grado phone amp
a
Seymour?
It's a little Seymour. using the same chip that
Wow.
they recommend on the Google image schematic.
And you don't like the use of a preamp in your system,
No, I
right?
use well, it's complicated. But a lot of the time I can get away without a preamp. The SG210 has a variable output which goes directly into my amplifier.
But you do have a very nice
Yeah, I
preamp.
made that little it's hard to see. It's a B1. No, that's my bottlehead. The B1 is there. That thing.
Yeah, the Nelson Pass
Yeah, that's the
B1 kit,
Pass
right?
Labs
Inyto.
B1 Pass DIY B1 board with the linear systems JFETs. And in there I have Jansen cross caps as the coupling capacitors. So that's another good one.
And that's a pass. Sorry, an active
Yeah,
buffer.
it's a
No
line
gain, right?
stage buffer, so it has no gain. All it does is it changes the volume using this, and it has a buffered output.
An Alps potentiometer.
So people have their own perspective on how these operate, but I'm fine with it. I don't really care.
Cool. So you use a Soul, and that was just a matter of circumstance. I think you got that one in a trade, right?
Yeah,
Or
I
something
traded
like that.
some of my stuff that I built, and I ended up like giving away a lot more valuable stuff than the Soul, but that's just kind of what I do with everything. So it's
Okay.
yeah, I got that in a trade, and it took me about 3 weeks of just dicking around with it to get it working as a turntable should be working.
And that's probably why they
That is
discontinued it.
definitely why they
was part of the
discontinued
reason.
it because I don't really want to talk shit about shit.
Yeah, it's okay. No,
But,
I know. We don't have to go into that.
There were a lot of things that could have been improved on, and it took like every ounce of strength I had to just not email them and say like, "Look, dude, this is what you got to do." And then they canned it, and that's another thing, dude. Right to repair. I am like, I want a second tone arm for this, so I can put on different cartridges. The reason I was so drawn to the Soul was because you can change the tone arms like a VPI. It didn't cost $4,000.
Right.
But the problem with that is the they don't support it anymore.
You can't buy it anymore.
Not only
can't
can you not buy it, they cut off all the support. So initially, I watched the entire thing go down. It was so bad. From the beginning of COVID, I was like, "Hey, sell me a tone arm. The tone arm, you can't buy it on your website." I knew. Can you sell me one? It's like we don't have parts anymore. This is going back like 2 years. It's like we're having a shortage of parts. We'll put you on a list. And then I was like, all right, 3 months. 3 months is a long time. Hey, can you sell me a tone arm? Yeah, we still don't have it. Wait like 9 months. And then on the website, it's out of stock. It took them almost a year to put it out of stock on the website. And I was like, oh, fuck shit. Something's happening. And then I emailed again, and I was like, can you guys sell me a tone arm or do something? Give me drawings. Give me parts. I'll make my own. And they're like, we do not have any parts at this time. 2 weeks later, they took it off their damn website. And I was like, these fuckers! And then I kept emailing them. I was like, do something. Before I freaking make my own tone arm, I don't want to spend 12 hours of my life going on McMaster-Carr, buying shit and machining my own tone arm for this thing and measuring that. I just want to buy the parts. I don't like working on my own stuff. And now they're just ignoring my emails. So it's gone from then till now to the point where they just ignore it. I was like, just give me something. Do something with this. Show me that you care about your now I can imagine, like, what if someone snaps a belt on the Soul, or they lose their belt?
Right.
Or if they put their tone arm down hard and it dulls the bearing, what are you going to do?
Well, even if you don't,
you rip your arm wire out. I actually had a Soul Smith because the guy broke a little connector off. Couldn't get in contact with shit to get them to fix their own fucking tone arm. That I'm very upset about.
You might have better luck with the shit Europe and
I
buy
don't
it
know,
from them. Just you have to export it or
It's
something.
like,
I don't know.
why am I ending
I'm sure
up
to find
with
you one.
a shit audio tone arm when they discontinued it like a week ago?
It's unlucky. But
real unlucky.
Tom and I wanted to ask you about because we know that you're an analog guy, obviously. If someone inherited a crate of records or whatever from their dad, and they want to get into analog audio, maybe let's say they already have a digital system they like a lot, and they want it to sound reasonably good. What would you recommend? Something that's affordable. Let's say, I don't know, between $500 to $1,000 for the table, the cart, and a Phonostage. If you could give recommendations.
Yeah, totally. You get a Rega P1. And a lot of people dislike the P1. You either, like, if you're good, you get something vintage and you fix it and you restore it. If you don't want to get involved with that yet or ever, you buy something that's plug and play. And the best things that I've worked with that are plug and play are the Rega turntables. They totally lack adjustability. But if you just put on a cartridge that's the right size, you set the tracking force and you do the overhang, just basic stuff, you can get incredible performance because the bearings in the arm are very good. The material of the arm is very good. Just the whole thing is like, it's a solid setup that holds speed. You get high quality materials and it's serviceable and it sounds good. It just sounds normal. It sounds like a turntable, which is something that is one of the greatest compliments I can give, is if it just works and it sounds good. The thing about Rega is they don't have all the adjustments. So
when you mean adjustments, you're talking about like VTA?
It has no VTA, no azimuth, and those are very important for getting it into like the next level of cartridge performance. Although, if you're into doing that anyways, you'll start to learn how to use shims. That's how you do it on a Rega arm. You shim the bass up and down. Well, you shim it up basically, and then you shim the cartridge so that you can align the azimuth. The cool thing about Soundsmith is that it's got these ridges in the top, and you can put in you can put in a rod in the middle one, and then it screws to your head shell and it sits on that rod, and then that allows you to tighten the screws that hold the cartridge and tilt the cartridge. They have built-in azimuth. So what I would recommend for a cartridge is not one of these. Would be a Soundsmith B&O cartridge. I'd get the SMMC3 with the head shell adapter. So it makes setup a little more difficult, but the SMMC3 is like it is the performance of $1,000 cartridge. It is literally a Carmen with a different elastomer, so it's a different compliance, but it's a Carmen. That's $1,000 cartridge, and it uses a cantilever that on its own is almost the price of the cartridge. So obviously we're getting them cheaper than what Namiki sells them for retail, but if you were to try and build this yourself, that would be insane. You'd be at the $1,000 mark. So the fact that it sells for $350 plus an adapter, you're up to like $400. That's a really good value. It uses a hyperelliptical stylus, a nude diamond that's a hyperellipse, and it's on an aluminum cantilever. It's swaged into the cantilever, so it's very low mass connection because it's using part of the mechanical retention of the aluminum with a tiny bit of glue. It's like, this is a really high performance system for $350. It's absolutely off the wall. So I would do that. And then for the Phonostage, there's a couple Phonostage that are a lot cheaper than Soundsmith. There's Lehman Audio. Then there was another one. Yeah, the Lehman Black Cube is like, that's the one for sub $500. Just, this is getting started above the turntable you find at the Goodwill. It's like you actually get interested into it.
Right.
So you buy a $500 Phonostage. That seems crazy. But the Lehman Black Cube, I don't know how much that actually costs. It's like between $300 and $500. I think that would bring you right at around the $1,000 price point with the turntable, Phonostage, and cartridge.
So Rega P1, Soundsmith SMMC3 with the head shell adapter and a used.
Yeah. I don't know if you need to buy used. Okay,
I don't know if they make.
They don't make the Black Cube anymore?
I don't know. That's what I'm asking you.
Well, I don't know. I'm not in the loop. I'm not in the market thing. So I know I was reading a magazine and I saw this beautiful Phonostage that had separate power supply, and I looked at the price. It was like $300. I was like, how are they doing this? So it's Chinese, obviously, but it's just like, it was really beautiful. It was just like the Lehman, but it had a separate chassis for the power supply, and it had its own discrete thing. I just can't for the life of me remember the name of that. MoFi makes an okay starter Phonostage. I'm not the biggest fan of their stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Their turntable rocks, though. Their turntable is like a Rega, but better. But it's more expensive than the P1. I think they start at like 600, so that would put us over budget.
Yeah.
But for anything more than that, I would get the MoFi. Their Phonostages are good. The shit audio Phonostage for $100, it works. It has all the settings. I am not a fan of the way that thing sounds, and it cannot be upgraded, which is another thing I'm not happy.
Now, let's say that someone did buy the setup that you just recommended, and then they wanted to, I don't know, tweak it over time, because there's a big market for analog tweaks, right? So is there anything that you would recommend looking at, maybe getting an aftermarket plotter mat or anything like that?
Well,
is that stuff worth it at that point?
Depends on your definition of tweaks. See, what I would recommend is an oscilloscope. You get an oscilloscope,
okay,
and you get a multimeter, and then you get a dual channel analog multimeter, which is that thing, and then you get a test record. So these are your tweaks. You play the test record, and now you can see the waveform your turntable is producing, and you can align it electrically, which is much more advanced than doing a geometric visual alignment. That gets you close, but then doing an analog electrical alignment, that is where you start to eke the performance out of your equipment. And from that point, it's like you will start to notice the difference in the mechanical coupling with the platter mat you use. You'll notice the difference in like even the belt you're running. You gotta optimize your stuff electrically, and I think the skills to do that not only will give you better results in your own system, it'll allow you to troubleshoot and fix turntables. Like that is what you do.
And you think that's even worth doing at the sub $1,000 level?
That's worth doing at like the $150 level. Just like Goodwill turntable stuff with a Shure cartridge. You want to be able to square that stuff up and see what it's doing.
You showed us earlier, so for audio listeners, Parker showed us the top of the Soundsmith cartridge. There's basically 3 grooves in it, and inside the groove you can put basically a shim, and tilt the cartridge side to side, and that's what gives you your azimuth adjustment. Do you have that same system on the half-inch adapter that you guys sell for the B&O
Unfortunately, cards? No. Our adapter is basically like what B&O was, just upgraded pins on the inside. So we just emulated the B&O head shell adapter. So the reason behind that was, I don't really know. I guess just so it's familiar. It's very easy to understand. The cartridge just plugs right into it.
Okay. Tom, I don't know if you had any other questions on the subject of audio.
What matters past the cartridge when it comes to turntables?
Well, the cartridge is going to be, especially at a high performance level, the cartridge is like 90+% of the sound of your system. And basically you want a turntable that's easy to work with. That eliminates like 99% of designs. So in being easy to work with, it's like I don't want any of the adjustments. First of all, it's got to have all the adjustments. Then I don't want them to interfere with each other. And then they have to not drift. And I got to be able to do it without breaking the arm. And you got to understand that the turntable is basically 2 systems. You got the geometric alignment of the tone arm, and you got your motor drive. And you need the motor drive to work the way it should. And a lot of times, getting it to work the way that it should, it's just fucking impossible. And you just got to get it as good as it can. The cool thing about this is like Japanese turntables. A lot of them had automatic functions and just like crazy nasty tone arms, but their motor drives were so good. They're like the most dead solid things, perfectly engineered. Denon, for instance, they had a turntable where the inside of the platter had a tape strip, a magnetic strip, and it had a tape head reading pulses in real time, and it would just hold the most accurate speed. You would cue down the stylus on a test tone. You'd look at the oscilloscope. You'd bang on the table, and it would just be solid, like it was coming out of your computer. It was just unbelievably perfect. Problem with a lot of that is the motor drives get very complicated. The more involved, a lot of direct drives have like crazy motor controllers because they got to power custom motors. So the Soul is a good example of something that's like good enough, where you can use one of
Tachyometer.
those to optimize it, or you can just roll with it, which is what I did because it's good enough. And that part I'm not thrilled about this turntable because there's no way to really adjust it without spending money. So yeah, adjustability is key in getting performance out of a turntable. And then you got to look at the design aspect too, because like my favorite turntable is a Lin ep2, but there's a lot of things it does wrong, especially with the stamped sub chassis. The thing costs $4,000 plus. Why is it using a piece of stamped steel? Just come on. There's a lot of things that can be improved. I don't think there's a single turntable I've worked on that I couldn't improve upon. Even the $300,000 Goldman reference, it was just like, buy something else. At this point, don't even bother. Yeah.
Same, put more into the cartridge.
I'd say
than
that
the
since the
turntable.
cartridge is 90% of what the turntable sounds like, you should spend 90% on the cartridge. Obviously, that's what no one does that. I don't even do that. But that's what you should be doing realistically. You got to find something that's good enough, and then just like put all your money towards a cool high performance cartridge and the stuff to align it. It's like you can have all this stuff, you can screw it together, and it'll still be crap if you don't do the right procedure to get it working properly. So the turntable is very involved, and the more you learn about it, the more involved it becomes. But you can get prepared, and it's not like it's difficult. I mean, this stuff, the equipment I have there is like 40, 50 years old, and it's just stuff you buy on eBay. People have known how to do this for longer than I've been alive, and people a lot dumber have been able to do a lot more with that setup than align a turntable. So it's actually when you take a step back and you evaluate, it's like, this is really easy to do. All you're doing is you're turning a screw and you're looking at the screen. It's simple.
It does make a lot of sense. Focus on the first transducer, especially when it comes to analog playback.
It's the hardest thing to make because it's so small. So in an analog turntable system, this is your source of distortion. This is like 90% of what the turntable is distorting. But overall, I'd say it's like probably 55% of the overall system distortion, where your speakers would comprise the majority of the rest of that. Your electronics are like under 5% typically.
All right. Well, I think that brings us to an album of the week, and since we have Parker here with us, I think we all decided to go with an analog
something we own on
album.
LP.
Yeah. So I decided to go with BB King live at the Regal in Chicago. I really love this album because it really represents BB King's stage presence, and some of my favorite parts of this is the audience, because the women are going insane. Like, they absolutely love BB King for every single moment that he's on stage. And man, when he sings "Please Love Me," whoa, they really want to. They really want to love BB King. But he continues on, and amazing performance. It's one of my favorites. I think it's 1967, maybe a little bit earlier than that, but in Chicago, live at the Regal Theater, BB King.
Is that a new pressing, Tom?
No, this is a repressed BB King. The original looks red, but I got this one. I forget where. Maybe it was at an auction or the flea market. I just No, actually, I bought it on Discogs. Or I remember now. I bought it on Discogs. One of the first ones.
Okay. Parker, you want to go next?
So my album is Locust Abortion Technician by the Butthole Surfers. I listened to these guys first when I was watching some sort of surf movie where a dude was trying to catch a big wave. They played Pepper, which was their most famous song, and I was like, these guys rock. And it's a lot. I don't have as much to say about it, but I just, every time I see a Butthole Surfers album, I buy it, and especially one that's a super limited edition. I love their music. I love their style. This is nowhere near their best performance or my favorite works by the Butthole Surfers, but I just love the way they present themselves, and even their studio recordings just have that raw energy that you get from a live performance.
Yeah, I love that.
You buy a lot of new vinyl, I assume.
Yeah,
that's your primary.
I buy a lot of new stuff because I don't have the means to clean dirty records, so I try to just keep my stuff clean. But I do go to the Goodwill like every week, and I try to find records in decent shape, and I play a lot of classical recordings. It's very cool because in the early days they were experimenting with like stereo imagery, and a lot of these classic recordings just had like incredible sonic presentation. It's like this actually opened up my mind to appreciate a whole new genre of music, actually hearing it the way it was intended. And I do buy a lot of used classical, but I don't really go into the
It's cheap.
It's cheap,
yeah. It is very cheap, and it's fun.
Usually they're just trying to give it away.
Yeah. Well, they give it to the Goodwill, and I pay money.
Yeah.
All right, here's my recommendation. This is, it's all flipped over. Young Marble Giants, Colossal Youth. This is 1980, I guess, post-punk. So it's like super sparse, super minimalist music. Just imagine that a decade ago there was the Sex Pistols, and now this is the new movement in the UK. It's on Rough Trade. The thing about this album is because it is so sparse in terms of the production and just the aesthetics of the recording, it sounds really good on like every system, whether it's a car stereo or earbuds or like an actual hi-fi. So I like to listen through to it to just when I'm listening to a system that I know is a bit lesser, but I still want to listen to something nice. It's this album. And track 13 is Credit in the Straight World, which, if you're not familiar, was covered by Courtney Love on Hole's 1994 album. So that's a fun fact. They originally wrote that. Buy that if you can find it. It's not expensive. It's like $30, I think, for a UK pressing.
Brand new?
I don't know if this one was reissued. This is an original, but I think, yeah, you can find it on Discogs, $30-$40. Rough Trade UK.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I think you can find mine for $10.
I don't know where you can even find that thing. probably find it if you look.
Butthole Surfers.
I'm sure it's on Discogs.
$15.
Yeah, right. Shipping is the one.
Good stuff. Well, Parker, thank you so much for your time, man. I mean, we could talk to you for hours, and we should definitely do this. Definitely do this again if you're up for it.
Anytime.
Yeah, thanks so much, Parker. I definitely learned a lot. Had no idea cartridges had so much, thought and tech.
Yeah, there's a lot more. If I had a piece of paper, I could really get into it. Maybe for another episode, we could explain the different facets of cartridge design.
Yeah, that'd be good. We should do that.
Yeah, how different designs produce different sonic signatures. That's a good idea.
All right, well, we'll cut it off here though, because I think we've run like over an hour now. I don't know. I've lost track, but time flies when you're having fun. So again, thank you, and have a good night. We'll catch you again.
Dude. I'll see you later.
See you guys later. Thank you.
Later.